Department Office of Digital Exchanges, whom we thank very much for actually contributing in this series of webinars that we have started in mid of March, and we continue to host them and discussing very interesting topics. I would like to thank especially our today's guest, which is Meirav Harel. Meirav, thank you very much for accepting our invitation in order to address a specific topic of special interest. Just to say a few words about Meirav, whom we're really thankful for being here with us. Meirav is an expert, a fintech wizard in foreign investment interfaces and especially in banking and blockchain. He's an advisor and a keynote speaker in various events. And her field of expertise is about blockchain, to which will be today's topic. Meirav, thank you very much. So the floor is yours.
My pleasure.
Thank you very much for being here with us. Just a quick a few words before I pass the floor to you. Just to remind to everyone that Meirav will do a presentation and then we will have some questions and answers. Our goal is actually to initiate a discussion, not just a speaker's view. This is what Digital Communication Network is about. It's a network, it's a platform of discussion. Meirav, thank you once again.
My pleasure. Hi. Do you want me to start the presentation? I'll share the screen. Okay, yes. So first of all, hi everybody. I'm going to be sharing a screen with you. Just a second. And obviously I'm going to be embarrassing myself because it's not on the right screen, but we're going to excuse me for that. Okay, can everybody see it?
Yes, thank you.
All right, so first of all, I'm very happy to be here, and I have to say that I'm kind of getting used to this kind of, giving lectures on Zoom, because I'm used to standing on stages, and this is weird for me. I like the personal contact and being able to see the people I talk to, and if I'm, if I'm explaining things right, and if they understand me, and if I'm not speaking too fast. So that's the first point. If I'm speaking too fast, please tell me. If something is not clear, feel free to just raise your hand and say what you need. And if it's too fast or too slow or too boring, or you want me to delve into something, please feel free to say what you need. A few words about myself. So I'm kind of a veteran in the fields of finance and technology for almost 20 years. I've been combining the two before they were named fintech. I was the business development manager and product manager of one of the biggest security trading websites in Israel, Trade. 3 years ago, I left Bank Leumi, and after that, I went into the fields of blockchain and digital currencies. I was in the middle there. I was COO and built operations of a startup named Bancor. I'm now the COO of a startup named Iconic in the fields of sports and entertainment. Originally, I started out as a programmer in the dot-com era, and then after the dot-com bubble burst, I pivoted into becoming a security investment consultant from the Israeli Security Authority. I've been chosen a few times around the world as one of the leading women in fintech, and another time a few weeks ago as one of the 100 most inspirational women in blockchain. And I work with international regulators, enterprises, financial institutions, banks, stock exchanges, and everything that has to do with bringing financial technology into these fields and adapting to the change that needs to be happening and is happening. So today we're going to be speaking a little bit about, I'd say, two very interesting topics. One of them is blockchain itself as a technology, which is interesting, and it could move forward or bring solutions without anything to do with what's happening around the world with the pandemic. And the second topic is the pandemic, and it has, all sorts of I'd say, new ideas that need to be tested, and that's where blockchain can come in and give answers. And we're going to be touching both of these together, and I'm going to be like the sequence of the lecture that I'm going to be giving today is going to be starting with a little bit of an explanation about blockchain, what it is, and why we need it. And then we're going to be delving into use cases of where it's already being used in regards to the virus. And then we're going to be expanding and seeing where it's going to be, where we're going to be seeing it, or expecting to be seeing it going into other fields that have to, that could be unrelated to the pandemic itself. So I'm going to start. Now, the thing is that I don't see all of you guys, okay? And I'm going to put the screen up. And I'd appreciate it if anybody could everybody could turn their cameras on, if that's okay. As many people that could turn their cameras on, that would be perfect. Yes. Okay, great. Hi, everybody. Nice to see you guys. It's good to see faces. Okay, hello. All right, so I want to ask here, who feels that they understand what blockchain is? Like, you can raise your hands if you feel it. Okay, not so and so. Anybody here feel comfortable understanding what blockchain? I'm going through all of your pictures and seeing you guys. All right, so I'm going to start. For those that know blockchain, I'm going to excuse myself for explaining it. And I'm going to go and start with explaining what blockchain is. Let's take it from the top. All right. So 2009, when Bitcoin came out, Satoshi Nakamoto, who was the name or the given name of whoever created Bitcoin, actually came out with two inventions or two ideas that have caught the minds and startup hearts. One of them was the coin itself. The other one was the underlying technology, blockchain. Okay, the coin itself is Bitcoin that we've all heard about, and the underlying technology is blockchain. And you can look at these at these two elements as two separate products. They don't have to go together. You can have currencies without blockchain, and you can have blockchain without cryptocurrencies. And we're going to be speaking today about the part of the blockchain. Okay. And let's start it with the problem. Where's the problem? So, humanity is. Somebody has his microphone off, and it's making noise. Could everybody turn their microphones off, and then we can turn them on again? All right, thank you. So there's an issue, okay? When people want to transact and move move something of value from one person to the other, there's a risk. And what's the risk? That at some point one of these people can come and say, you know what? Even if we transacted, and let's say I gave you the car and you gave me money, I could just somebody can come and say, you know what, that car is actually mine, or the money wasn't paid. Okay, now this is the risk that happens in any transaction, and humanity, throughout, ever since humans were around, needed some way to keep track of this transfer of value from one person to the other. Okay, so what was the solution? And here I'm asking you guys again, if somebody wants to join in, what was the solution that we all know in order to keep track of value and what belongs to whom? What did we use as humanity? Feel free to turn on your microphone and answer.
Contracts.
Contracts is one. What else?
Governments.
Governments, that's correct. What else?
Receipts.
Sorry? Receipts. Yes, some sort of documentation. What else? Think about the major things when we're transferring. What?
Third parties.
Oh, third parties. Exactly. Okay. Now imagine when we're transferring a house from one person to the other, we need it to be written somewhere that this house belongs to us and not to somebody else, right? Even with a car, it's registered under our name. And when we're talking about money, who keeps the registration? The banks. Okay. Now the thing is that having a third party be the one that keeps track of everything, it works. It works for a lot of years. But the question is, could something go wrong if we have a third party keeping track? Okay, so I'm going to ask again, what could go wrong? Think about all the third parties that like banks, or where your houses are registered, or the cars that are registered. What could be a problem with having a third party keep track of everything? You can turn on your microphones and answer. Legislation. What else?
Corruption. Third party could become biased.
Corruption. That's right. What if the third party isn't neutral? What happens then? That's problematic, right? What else could go wrong?
Data protection.
Sorry?
Data protection.
Data protection. What if somebody goes into the database and starts changing the records That's a problem, right? That's a real problem. What else?
Data loss.
Total loss. Okay, you guys know that in 9/11, when the buildings collapsed, then the insurance companies paid for the machinery, the computers, the chairs. What they couldn't cover was what? The data. Okay, what happens when the data is lost from these databases? And this is something that when you have the data only in one place, that's a risk, right? What else could go wrong with having a third party? What about if the third party says, sorry?
Bankruptcy of the third party.
Bankruptcy of the third party, right? Okay, and here's another scenario, and I guess you all know this from all sorts of places that you have third parties. What if this third party says, you know what? I keep all the data, and you guys should start paying commission to me for keeping this data. And not only that, yeah, they ask for money, right? And not only that, they don't necessarily, and they don't necessarily work around the clock, right? They say, oh, we only have we only accept customers 4 hours a day or something like that, right? Because they're so used to everybody needing them that the power kind of shifts. Okay, now the thing is that humanity couldn't find a better solution for this for many years until recently, and we all have these wonderful little phones, and I want to remind you that these phones are actually computers, and they're stronger than the first IBM that sent a spaceship to space. Okay, and suddenly there was a way to keep another way of keeping track of what belongs to whom without using a third party. And this is where blockchain comes in. And I'm going to kind of explain to you how it works. And in order to do that, I want you all to imagine us, the participants of this conference. How many people do we have here?
50.
Nicholas, how many people? How many?
55.
50 people. 55 people. Okay.
55.
So let's
Be accurate.
sorry.
We should be accurate as you.
55. All right. Yeah, I can see it. Yeah, now I can see it. So now let's imagine that all of us together decide that we want to work together and keep transactions or keep a list of transactions that are happening in our little group. Okay. So what we're going to all be doing in order to do that is imagine that we all take out a piece of paper, an A4 piece of paper. And now we start writing down all of our transactions. Okay, so let's say if Meirav transfers Nicholas 1,000 euros, we're all going to be writing Meirav transferred Nicholas 1,000 euros. And then the row underneath, Nicholas sent Vlad 500 euros. And we're all going to write another row and exactly write that down. And we're going to continue writing all of the transactions that we have in our group. And assuming that we have the same amount of lines and the same amount of space, at some point, what's going to happen to our paper? It's going to finish. Okay. Now, if we decided ahead of time that we all do a calculation when the page is finished, and the calculation could be the amount of transactions divided by the amount of money multiplied by the amount of people in our group, or some sort of algorithm that we decided upon, what should happen when we do the calculation? All of us should have the same result, assuming that we wrote everything the same on all of our pages, right? And if somebody got a different conclusion or got a different result on computing this algorithm, then we know that he has a mistake there. Okay, so assuming that all of us have the same thing, imagine that all of us take this piece of paper, and each of us itself, right? We have now 55 copies of this piece of paper. We put it in our file cabinet, and we take out a new paper and continue writing. Okay, now let's think. What happens when we use this kind of system? Okay. Remember the problems that we said that we have with the third party? First of all, where is the data right now? Does one person have it? You can turn on your microphones again. Who has the data right now?
It's a public.
All of us, right? All of us have it.
Everybody.
Right? Everybody has it. We have 55 copies. Now, if one of us, his file got corrupted, okay, what happens? Not much. We still have 54 copies. What?
Right. You have a backup from the other members.
We have 54 backups. Not only that, if somebody decides that he wants to go and corrupt the data and change the records in one of our files, is that going to be
incoherent data? Incoherence in data?
If somebody wants to come and let's say go into my file cabinet or files and change the data there and say that a car belongs to or the money didn't transfer to, would that help him if there are another 54 copies of this data?
No.
Okay, so if you notice the idea of having these multiple databases and having a lot of people at the same time writing the data and adding data, and then it's verified because everybody wrote the same, kind of solves the problem of the third party. Okay, so this is the idea of blockchain, and you can see it as having a database that has many copies in different places, and there are a lot of people managing this database. Okay, now where can you use this? You can use this data. You can use this first of all for fraud prevention. You can do this for supply chain management, where I'm going to be speaking about, in depth in a little while, for digital assets. Okay, and in keeping track of ownership, like we said, and there are a lot of different kind of use cases. So before we go and talk about coronavirus and blockchain, this is a good time to ask you guys if you have any questions about blockchain as technology in itself. Is it clear? Is it not clear?
It is clear for me. For me, it is clear, but
okay. Any questions? Does anybody want to ask questions about blockchain itself?
So I have a question. So we know that in currently we have explored that in the banking sector, there are many banks who are going for the blockchain as a private blockchain. They're doing it in their own network. Do you really call them as a blockchain? Because eventually they're restricting within a set of users, and there is a administrator who is controlling all those networks. So ideally we are shying away and going away from the main principle of blockchain. So so what is your take? Do you really think we can call that as a blockchain, and is that a revolution really happening in the banking sector, or we need to look again from the financial sector perspective, how we can efficiently implement blockchain there?
Okay, so it's a really good question, because I think that part of the ideology of blockchain and actually cryptocurrencies or Bitcoin is the issue of decentralization. What we said, that we don't want the data to be centralized in the hands of one body, and there is kind of a dilemma here, because if organizations use blockchain as a technology not to create decentralization, but rather keep it inside their database, then they're using blockchain. They are using the technology, but they're not using it for decentralization, and that could kind of like, I see a lot of similarities between what we're seeing now with the technology of blockchain and what was around in the dot-com era with the issue of internet. It's like asking, if companies use their own internet, like an intranet. It was later called an intranet, right? They're still using the same kind of technology, but they're doing it, instead of having an internet that goes around the world, they're using it inside their own organization. Right, so I could see the similarity here, that yes, you can use this technology exactly like you can use any other technology in different kind of use cases, but then you'd be losing the benefit of decentralization if you're using it only inside an organization. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Merav, can we take two questions that have been asked in the chat room?
Sure.
Thanos, he asks, if I'll have everyone else's data, isn't there a risk of loss of confidentiality?
Oh, okay. So there are solutions to this, because you can decide that the blockchain is completely, I'd say, non-confidential, and then you have the names of Merav transferred the money to Nicholas. Or theoretically, you can have a database that is separate, and we give codes to each other. So instead of saying Merav, it would be like XYZ transferred 1,000 euros to MNO. Okay, and then you kind of have the privacy, and you have different kinds of solutions. That's just one of the solutions that can be used for blockchain to have privacy and security. And there are a lot of different ways to do that. Okay,
just a disclaimer: these monies that Merav is talking about are just hypothetical. Don't imagine that we will get out with money from today's webinar. So
okay. First of all, I have to say that we haven't been speaking about money yet. All right. Right now, we're talking about databases and blockchain. Yes, and I want to put a disclaimer that I'm not going to be teaching anybody how to make money today. Okay. So whoever was expecting me to tell them where to invest, that's not going to happen. What we're talking about is this kind of technology, the database that we're talking about. We are going to be speaking about the future of money. That's true. and what's happening with money in the world, and you know, all the movement to digital money, which is very interesting. What's happening right now, and the pandemic is actually pushing it. It's actually very interesting. So I am kind of like urging you, you know, stay tuned. It's going to be very interesting.
And also today's webinar is about becoming more literate about the technology that
exactly the blockchain technology itself, and money is only one use case of blockchain. There are many, many more. We're going to be talking about, I think, like 8 or 10 of them today. One of them is money. I know it's very interesting, but other ones are very interesting as well. Do we have more questions, or can we move into the use cases?
Let me just, because these questions, I think that they're really helpful in order to clarify issues. So Zuzana is asking about, what about if someone would like to keep paid amount money as confidential, due, for example, to trade secret? And Elizabeth is asking, so who owns the blockchain technology? Where does it reside?
That's nice. Okay. So theoretically, the blockchain that we created in our group right now with the 55 people, it resides in each one of our hands. Okay. And, you know, when you hear crypto miners, or the miners of the ones that are mining the crypto, they're the ones that are actually doing the calculations that we spoke about, okay? And as a reward for doing that calculation at the end of the page, right? We said we were writing things down, and then at the end of the page, we're all doing a calculation. The reward that people receive is for doing that calculation, okay? And the ones that do it faster can get an extra reward, and that's why the people in the digital currency, or let's say the blockchain field, are always trying to get stronger and stronger computers in order to just be computing faster. Okay, so who owns the data in our little case? All of us, right? The data is owned by all of us. Okay, did I answer the question, or was there another paragraph there that I didn't answer?
Yes, yes, according to my part. And what about the other question about Susanna? What about if someone would like to keep paid amount money as confidential?
Well, I don't understand that question. Did you understand it? I'm not sure I understand.
Open, if you want to turn on your microphone and ask it directly. Otherwise, let me ask from Mikhail, which is asking, please elaborate on using blockchain for digital assets. And then Gobi asks how they drive value for digital currency. These are the last.
Okay.
And then
wait, digital assets is such an important thing. And I'll be talking about them later. Remind me if I forget to talk about them, because I didn't put it in a slide here. We had a small amount of time, and I didn't bring all the use cases. But digital assets is so interesting. And what was the second one? The second question?
The second one is about how they drive value for digital currency. How blockchain is driving value for digital currency.
Okay. So how is driving the whole issue of digital currencies and value? Let's get to them in a few slides, and I'll be touching upon that in a few minutes, in a few slides. Okay, and then you can ask me if I didn't answer the question. Okay, so can we continue?
Yes. Yes.
Are we ready?
Of course.
All right. Okay. So something very interesting happened in the world a few months ago, and we don't know if this is, you know, is this going to be something that's going to be staying in our lives, or if it's something that's going to be passing. But you know, a lot of people are saying that, you know, one of the things is that to help with what's happening around us is actually using I'd say the upsides of blockchain. Okay, so let's take a look and see what kind of already being.
Meirav, we cannot hear you so well. Can you repeat?
Well?
No. We can hear you now. Well, okay.
Now it's okay?
Yes, it is.
All right. Okay. So let's see how blockchain is assisting and can assist in the recovery and the crisis of the COVID-19. Okay. First thing is first. You know, we spoke about the supply chain management. So the first, you know, all of us have seen that during this pandemic, a few things have happened. First of all, the production facilities have shut down, right, due to the safety concerns, and also an unprecedented demand for certain goods, especially in the fields of medical supplies. But the problem was that a lot of buyers were supposed to, you know, they had to buy things and they didn't know where they were buying it from, right? They couldn't check what was the origin, what was the quality of what they were buying, and it created a lot of problems. And this is a good place where blockchain can be helpful, because when we're buying it in a supply chain, every time a product is written down, and every time it changes hands, it's written down. At the end of the line, when something reaches our doorstep or the store or the hospital with the medical supply, we know exactly where the origin was. Okay, so this is very important because it brings, first of all, it brings transparency, and the second thing is that the data is available and you can use it. Now let's see where you can use it in the COVID itself. Okay. So first of all, you could use it as a solution for the medical products. Okay, just a minute, I want to move this around. This is blocking my view. Okay, so first of all, you can see the origins of where different products of the medical products and other stuff, where it's coming from and where it transferred hands. And if there's something wrong, you could also have it, let's say if there was a testing at some point, you could see where it was tested and where it was correct and where something got ruined on the way. And another thing that we can already see that it's being used for is to have, Alipay. Alipay is very interesting. China is very interesting, by the way, because it is using different technologies and it's kind of more advanced than a lot of countries in the world. So first of all, Alipay has used it in order to help charities to collaborate and be more efficient and transparent in everything that has to do with COVID right now. The thing is that the whole, I'd say the whole supply chain and what we said about it being able to be easily tracked by blockchain, then it was really interesting because the U.S. Department of Homeland Security actually, when it was giving out the guidelines for the coronavirus pandemic, it was actually listing blockchain managers not only in food and agriculture and in medicine, they were called critical workers. Okay, because the understanding here is that this is something that could help us with making sure that what's being transferred is being transferred correctly. And there were cases of medical supplies getting to hospitals where and the medical supplies were defected, and that's an issue. Another issue that this is something also very interesting. That customers don't need to sign anymore for the deliveries in order to for the social distancing. And the problem was that when this is happening, then the fraudulent chargebacks are actually skyrocketing and growing. And there are startups around that developed a way to accept deliveries without needing any physical signature, and this could help with dealing with the frauds. This one is very interesting. People that have been infected by the virus need to be in social distance, right? And they can't go around. Now the problem, this is something that, this is interesting because it kind of raises a moral question about privacy that I think we kind of, somebody asked about it. But one of the solutions is that you have blockchain that is used for gathering the data of patients and monitoring their movements and enforcing social distance. And theoretically and hopefully, they're keeping the identities protected at any given time. Now, this is something that's relevant not only for the pandemic. This could continue going on because I don't know how many of you have had, I'd say, the misfortune of dealing with the medical crisis with your loved ones. My daughter went through a major surgery last year, and we had to do it abroad. And one of the problems that I had to deal with was the logistic issue of having to transfer her data from one place to another and to different hospitals. That means that I needed to send MRIs and CTs and all the rest of her medical records. And I had to, I was interviewing doctors from 5 different countries around the world. And every time I had to send it, and it couldn't always be sent by email because MRIs are too big and you need the real disk. And I had to start sending data with actual carriers. I needed to use disks and send physical data from one country to the other with UPS and other delivery companies. Now, this is something that it's problematic. It wastes time. When you have a medical crisis, you need the data to be available. And this is also relevant not only when you're talking internationally, but also internally. You have different medical companies, and when you want to transfer the medical data from one place to the other, they don't necessarily have the ability to talk to each other. Whereas if all of this information was kept on a blockchain and people could give permission, then I could say, the hospital of the Columbia University Hospital could go into the files of my daughter and see everything there. That could save a lot of time and a lot of effort, especially in times of medical crisis. Okay, so Another issue that happened with the pandemic is that has to do with insurance and disaster relief. Many businesses got into trouble, and a lot of physical retail locations were closed, and a lot of items were still in demand. Now governments have stepped in to prevent and reduce the onset of a recession or worse, and they said, okay, let's do loans and let's give loans to people. But the problem is that you don't necessarily have banks, and you still need to keep social distancing, right? So there are places in the world that utilize blockchain in order to simplify the complicated process of taking loans. And one of the places that did this was in China. There were 87 businesses that got around more than $200 million in loans using a pilot blockchain financial platform. Okay, now this is something that we're seeing around the world, and this kind of has to do with the question that was asked before about digital assets, and not only digital assets. One of the nice things about blockchain is that it enables having multiple owners. Well, I'll talk about it when we get to the digital currencies. I'll talk about it later again. But the idea is that you can also use blockchain in order to keep track of loans and keep track of insurance and everything that has to do with data and third parties. This is a good place to use it. Where was it not used? There were places around the world that had elections during the virus, and that's kind of problematic because when you have a virus and you need people to go and vote, they can't necessarily leave the house. And then what are you supposed to do? If you're supposed to do it from your cell phone or from your computer, how do you know that people are not cheating, right? So the idea is that theoretically there could have been a secure blockchain based on a mobile app, right? That could have reduced or eliminated the unnecessary public exposure during the recent elections that happened. Now, Estonia did provide an operational proof of concept for electronic voting, but their system was problematic for the whole issue of identity and authentication methods. But if they were using blockchain, that could have been solved. So the idea is that if you have blockchain-based voting technology, it can address many of the security concerns in the e-voting process. Okay. And one of my favorites, this is how blockchain can be helping, not necessarily because of COVID, but in the field of sports. And as you all know, also the field of sport has been affected by the pandemic, and you can't fill the stadiums anymore. And clubs around the world are asking for different solutions. I'm not going to go into the solutions that the company and the COO of has for the sports industry, but it's very interesting, and it includes the ability to view games with VR. But one of the ideas or one of the solutions that we're solving is the whole issue of ticketing. How many here are sports fans and like to go and see sports in the stadiums? A lot, I see. Okay, all right. When you want to go and buy a ticket, are you buying it straight from the club, or do you go through, like, how much do you need to pay for a game? Quite a lot, right? Why? Because when the clubs are selling the tickets, then bots are collecting the tickets and then reselling them again with a very high price. Okay, and that's annoying. So one of the idea is to use blockchain for the ownership of tickets for sports events, and that's another place where blockchain can be used. And that's something that we're doing, and not only that, for tracing memorabilia. And you can actually use blockchain for many different aspects, and we're doing that in the project that I'm now working with. Another thing is that because of this is interesting. Blockchain kind of allows people to transfer funds from one place to the other without needing to use the regular systems that we know. That means that and this has an upside and a downside, because countries that you want to kind of like say we don't want to do business with them, and you have all sorts of governments that have issues with other governments, and you don't want to have money transferred there, and they're shutting down the doors of the SWIFT and all the rest of it. They can still transfer money in digital currencies and on blockchain. Now, this is a good thing and a bad thing, because that means that people can that are in countries that have problems of receiving money or transferring money out, they could just change it into digital currencies, which we're going to be touching in a few minutes, and transfer that money abroad. And the other side of it is that when you're a project and you want to have cash flow, you could still do it on blockchain and still receive international transactions with this kind of technology. This is my favorite. Okay, there's a whole issue with cash. Okay, with the pandemic. Now, theoretically, when we're touching something and we have coronavirus and we're transferring to somebody else, what happens to somebody else? He could get the virus. Now, cash is something that we transfer from one hand to the other. And this kind of brings a very weird situation where in China, the country's central bank has actually implemented a new way to contain the virus. It is deep cleaning and destroying infected cash, okay? Literally washing and laundering the cash, okay? Now, all Chinese banks now must literally launder their cash, disinfecting it with ultraviolet light and high temperature, and then storing it for 7 to 14 days before releasing it to the customers. Can you believe that? Okay, now this is something that I wouldn't believe if I read it in some sort of science fiction, but this is what's happening right now in the world. And it's not only happening in China, okay? It's happening in places around the world where there are restaurants that they're having their employees wear latex gloves in order to touch money. And they're having it in banks with ATMs, and they need to, some ATMs, when they're depositing cash, they need to actually disinfect the ATM and disinfect the money that is going, the money that's going through the machine. So this is kind of a weird situation, and I think that the cherry on top is actually this news article that came out a few weeks ago in Forbes that was talking about an issue that the United States government is actually having. The U.S. wanted to send relief to people and to send them a certain amount of money. I think it was $1,000, $2,000 per person. But the problem is that not everyone in the United States and in the world has a bank account. Now, the question is, how do you send money to a person that does not have a bank account? And one of the ideas that came up is to actually create a digital dollar. Now, creating a digital dollar is something that people were considering, or I'd say the government was considering for quite a while, and there were always reasons why to do it and why not to do it, and it was kind of like put aside. And suddenly, it's on the front stage again, and the United States government is actually creating the idea of having a digital dollar, and where they're going to be depositing the funds into a digital wallet that's going to be straight in a Fed account, okay, which is actually a free bank account that can be used to receive money and make payments and take out cash, okay? And they're in the Federal Reserve, okay, in the central bank. Now think about this. This is actually creating another kind of bank. And what does that mean for regular banks?
That we would not need them.
Okay.
Concurrence.
So, and this kind of brings us to the section of talking about this kind of, can you hear me? Because I just had a phone call. Is it okay? Yes. You can hear me again?
We can hear you.
Sorry?
We can
you guys hear me?
You.
Okay, yeah, I had a mal connection for a second. Which brings us to the second part of what we were talking about. And this is bringing us to the issue of money, where blockchain is creating a very big revolution on many, many levels, okay? So I'm going to start with saying, okay, having central digital currencies by governments is not something that it's going to be a widespread scenario. The chief economist of ING in Germany said that in a few years we're going to be seeing this all over the world, and governments are going to be creating their own digital currencies. I think that the most advanced one is actually China. That came out a few months ago, I think somewhere around September, and it says that it's going to be creating a digital currency from China's central bank, and it's going to be a digital yuan actually. And the funny thing was that a lot of questions started being raised about using digital currencies, and I think that one of the big ones actually came after Facebook decided that they want to create Libra, the digital token, and there was a whole issue around the world with a lot of governments saying, no, we can't have Facebook create a digital currency? We're going to touch upon that in a few minutes and ask ourselves, why were they so worried and why would Facebook want to have a digital currency? But the interesting thing was that the governor of the Bank of England came out and said that, you know, what's the problem with having a digital currency that is not created by a country? And actually, he said something that was at first really surprising, but then it came up again in the Economic Forum in Davos in January, that he said, you know, we're all using the dollar as the reserve, right? And why should we be using the dollar? Shouldn't we be using some sort of other currency that is not created by a government, but rather in private hands? And, you know, at first this was like something that created turmoil because it's you know, changing the reserves from dollars to something else is it kind of changed a lot of paradigms. But it was something that people were asking about, you know, and chief economists around the world asking about it, which kind of brings us to the whole issue of digital currencies that are created not only by governments. Okay. You know, when Facebook came out, I'm going to ask you guys another question. Facebook came out a few months ago and said that it wants to create a digital currency. Now, we know that it was stopped, and we know that they changed their name, the project, into Libra, but into Novi. But I want to ask you guys, why would Facebook or any other tech giant, or for that matter, a government, what is their interest in? Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now. We lost you for a second.
Yeah. Okay, so what do you guys think? Why would Facebook want to have a digital currency? What value would that bring to them? You can open your microphones and share your ideas.
Markets without access to banks, I guess.
Sorry, can you repeat that?
Markets without proper access to banks, like let's say the deep end of the world where there is nothing but communication available.
Wonderful. So we're talking about reaching a market share of people that are underbanked. And that's a market that could buy things on Amazon and everywhere else. And a lot of companies want to infiltrate that sector. So that's one reason to have a digital currency. And these people don't need to have a bank account. They can just use the currency of Facebook or any other digital currency that is created. Wonderful insight. What else?
You don't have processing fees.
Exactly. It's cheaper for them. Perfect. If you're selling things and you need money to be transferred, you're saving all the fees in the way, or actually making those fees if you're taking the fees yourself. What else? There's another reason. I'll give you a hint. What comes with digital money? There's something that you get. If you know where all the digital money is going, what do you have?
You can have like data and insights about the customers' behavior, what do they want to buy, invest in, and things like that. So.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Very good. Okay. So this is something that is very, very, very important. Okay. Now, the tech giants, as I'll remind you, all know how to use data. Okay. Now, imagine what you know about people if you know exactly where their money is going. Okay. So is it a wonder that Facebook wants to create a digital currency? Is it a wonder that Amazon would want to create a digital currency? Is it a wonder that China would want to create a digital currency? And we're going to touch upon China in a second. Is it a wonder that any of the other countries, look how many countries are thinking about digital currencies, okay? But I did want to say something else about this. I don't remember what it was. It slipped my mind. I'll just continue and then it'll come back to me again. And China, let's talk about China for a second, okay? Do you guys remember that China has a credit system for people? That she's giving points for people on their behavior. And according to these points, there are ideas of having various levels of tax payment according to your social credit and where your kids could go to school and what type of medical access you're receiving. Now imagine that they're doing this even before having digital money. Imagine them having all of this data and giving credit according to where your money is going. Okay, it's like 1984 on steroids. Okay, So this is one of the scenarios of this. And there was another thing that I wanted to say. What was it? Oh, Cambridge Analytics. Let's talk about Cambridge Analytics and what can be done with the data with the tech giants. Okay, so that's, I'd say, one of the dangers in having digital money is, as comfortable as it is, it's still problematic if somebody's going to be using that data and knowing about us so much, and who's going to be having that data and who's going to be trusted with that data. That's something that we can, talk upon in questions when we continue the conversation. But when Facebook came out with the idea of having a digital currency, of course they weren't the first company to do it. And theoretically, or even actually today, technologically, any one of us are right now in this conference, or anyone around the world can technologically create a new currency, a new coin. Okay, not only Facebook can do that, but any other company. Now, oh, I did remember what I wanted to say. I can't believe I didn't say that. Why did the regulators stop Facebook from doing this? Because we have Bitcoin and we have all the other digital currencies. There were tens of thousands of digital currencies that were produced during 2017 and 2018. Why did the governments stand on their back legs and say no to Facebook? Does anybody have an idea? What was the danger there? Why were they afraid of Facebook?
Monopoly.
Maybe
Monopoly?
Also from US.
Sorry, what?
Like
Yeah.
I didn't hear. Sorry, could you repeat that?
Yeah, maybe because Facebook is also US based.
Okay, maybe there's something even worse than that, even more scary than that.
They don't want them to be monopoly. They are too strong in any case, and having such a power in their hand could be dangerous to the competition, to other companies, to the competition.
Or maybe they can use the Facebook data.
To the privacy and competition of other companies.
It's even more than that. It's even more than that. How many users does Facebook have?
Millions.
Billions.
2.7 million if you take the people that have two accounts, 2.2 billion people. Okay. Now, the Libra coin that they wanted to have, do you remember how they wanted it to be existed? They said for every Libra that we're taking out, what are they putting on the side? A basket of currencies. Okay. They were talking about euro and dollar and maybe yen. Okay. When you have a currency that is backed by a basket of currencies, what do you become? Who does that?
You become a bank.
You become a central bank.
Central bank, yes. Yeah.
Okay. Now imagine a central bank that has 2.something billion people. It becomes the biggest central bank.
Yes.
Therefore, the risk is not only for competitors, it's actually becoming a risk for governments. Okay. Facebook was very scary in that regard because they could actually become the biggest central bank in the world. Okay.
Yes.
So the idea had been stopped and they kind of changed it and they said, okay, we're not going to be creating a basket of tokens. We might be using derivatives of digital currencies, and they're now rethinking the whole issue. But this kind of brings us to this place that technologically today, anybody can create digital currencies. Okay. Now we don't know exactly what the business model for the private sector is, and why would there, what would be the use case for having a Vlad token or a Nicholas token? I don't know. Nobody has invented it yet, but we do know what the use case is for companies to do this, right? But there's a whole issue, because if anybody can create currencies that can be used in order to buy goods, and we have a lot of people creating non-digital currencies, there are a lot of implications on macroeconomics, because all of us know that the amount of money that is circulating is a monetary tool. Now, what happens when governments lose control of the amount of money in their government? Okay, that's an issue. That's a very big issue. Now, the thing is that today, technologically, anybody can create currencies. And that means the amount of money in any given place is not up to only governments. That means that we don't have financial models for this kind of situation. Could there be a financial crisis? What happens with inflation with too many kinds of money going around? What's the real value of money? What about reserves? There are so many questions that come up from the ability to create money. And I want to remind you, and I'm kind of like circling back, having money created in private hands is actually one of the ways to do it is actually on blockchain. That's what Bitcoin is using. And when I'm talking about those 10,000 or 20,000 tokens that had been created throughout 2017 and 2018, they were based on blockchain. So when we're talking about one of the use cases of what blockchain can be used for, it can be used for creating money, creating money that is not government created. Okay, so this is a whole issue, and we could talk about this for hours. And what is money, and why are governments the ones that are creating it, and who said that governments are the ones that need to be creating? There's a whole philosophical question about this, but at this given moment right now, one of the use cases of blockchain is actually creating money, and there are a lot of implications to that. Okay,
Mirav, there is another issue also with the taxes. They cannot collect taxes. That's a big issue for government. So it was
this is an issue, but this was solved. Let's say people that are working in the crypto or in the I don't like the word cryptocurrency, but in the digital currency fields and get paid in digital currencies, the governments ask them to fill out their taxes and report it, and and that's what people do. They yes, they have less control, but the governments have less control.
It is voluntarily and it is not directly and automatically. So it is a big headache for governments. They don't want to deal with it. So that's a big issue.
Yeah, that's a big issue. But this is also something that can be solved, because if everything is on a blockchain, then and theoretically, at some point the governments are going to say we have access to the blockchains, then they'll be able to see who gets money and where it gets transferred to. That's just a technological problem. But the problem, I think that the one that nobody knows how to solve is the effect on macroeconomics of having so many different kinds of money being able to be created at any given time. Okay, so I'm going to go really fast into other areas of blockchain. So first of all, it can be used in the fields of energy, and it could also be used in the fields of free speech and journalism and truth. And there are a few cases. I gave a lecture about this in South Africa, again through World Learning. There were cases around the world that free speech was stopped, and every time that people wanted to report something or bring it up on their social media, the governments took it down. And what happened was that people were using blockchain in order to put in messages that can't be deleted. Okay, and one of these cases was regarding a rabies vaccine scandal that went viral, and there was a WeChat. Every time there was a WeChat post, the censorship took it down from the social media, and then somebody just sent himself a very small transaction of like $50, and on there he wrote the words that he wanted to be kept. He engraved it there, and he spoke about what was happening in China there. So one of the places that could be affected is speech and journalism and truth, because blockchain can keep track of who said what where. But this is also a double-edged sword, because what if somebody spreads fake news and then it's kept on the blockchain forever? Let's say the world is flat, and then it's going to be on the blockchain. Everybody thinks, oh, the world is flat because it's all over the place, right? Or what if somebody I don't know, fabricates something that somebody said, and then it's on the blockchain forever and ever, and that person can't get rid of the so-called what he said, right? So, but this is another field that it can come into. And now I'm going to get into digital assets, and I want to talk about houses, because the idea with digital assets is that on blockchain you can create not only money, you can also create different kinds of assets, like securities, different kinds of securities. And you have now, let's say a few years ago, all these coins that were created in initial coin offerings. Right now you have security token offerings, okay, where the idea is to actually recreate the regular stock exchanges that we know, and even create more types of asset classes and investment tools that are actually based on blockchain, okay? And there are a lot of benefits of using blockchain, especially in this field of digital assets. It's a whole lecture in itself, but this is another field that's very, very important. And I think that one of the interesting derivatives of this is that you can actually tokenize or securitize assets that are very hard to securitize right now. And I'm talking about buildings or paintings or pieces of land, because theoretically, when you have, and this is already happening, okay, you can take a building and offer, I'd say, securities based on it, and they're not going to be stocks, they could be security tokens that actually divide the building into different holders of this building, okay? So imagine that you're creating 100 shares or 100 security tokens, and each person that is buying one of these security tokens is actually getting ownership of 1 divided up 100 of the building or the piece of land or the piece of art, like a Picasso picture. Now, these security tokens are actually assets that can be later traded on exchanges, okay? So theoretically, right now, we could have another kind of asset class in exchanges that could be parts of buildings, okay? Or parts of art. And they could be traded hands in the secondary markets. I don't want to go too deep into this because I'm kind of like using terms from people that do trading on stocks and stuff, but it can change everything that has to do with security trading, okay? This is the end of my lecture, and this is the time for our Q&A. Are we on time right now, Nicholas? Are we okay with time?
Yes, we are okay. We are okay, Miriam. Thank you very much, because we have also some questions in the chat room. So
sure.
Let us start from these ones, and then we can you can open your microphones and address directly Meirav. So Elizabeth is asking, so who owns the blockchain technology? Where does it reside? The second thing is, we have answered this one, I'm sorry. Cassandra is actually asking if blockchain is used in a particular industry sector, let's say healthcare and medical facilities, for records as indicated in your earlier example. Firstly, who essentially owns the data? Secondly, who would control the ethical use of such data or its security?
I love this question.
Let's start from this question and then we will move on, because I think it's very...
Yes. It's a really good question, okay? The thing is this, that we you know, there's a whole saying that's been around for a few years that says data is the new oil, okay? Now, this is such a good question. Who does this data belong to, okay? And we can take it and ask it in different directions. Let's say when I post things on Facebook or on LinkedIn, okay? Somebody's making money off that, right? Facebook is making a lot of money, or when I'm searching for things in Google, okay? It's my data that is being used in Google in order to create value for Google, okay? Wouldn't it make sense if this is my data and I'm creating posts that are, you know, reaching a lot of people? Shouldn't I be getting some sort of percentage from the revenue that is created from the data that I am creating? Okay, so right now, who owns the data? The companies own the data. Who owns the data of Facebook? Facebook. And who owns the data that you have in Google? Google, okay? And how much time do we have, Nicholas? Because I have a really cute story about data.
We have time. We have an extra 20 minutes. We can go on.
All right. Okay. So I want to delve into this because this is a very important question that we need to give as humanity. We need to give it thought. You know, there was a coffee shop next to the Brown University, the Shiru coffee shop. Have you heard about it? Has anybody heard about it? They were selling to students, you know, croissants, coffee, and stuff like that. But when the students were coming into the coffee shop, they were not paying with money. Does anybody know what they were paying with? They were answering questionnaires, okay? They were actually paying for their coffee and croissants with data, okay? Now, this kind of raises a question, right? First of all, who does this data belong to? Second of all, what is the value of this data, okay? And third of all, what was Shiru Cafe doing with this data anyway? So the thing is that at the same year, JP Morgan, when it was, I think it was JP Morgan, one of the big banks there, was hiring students, and out of the 30 students that they were hiring, 27 were actually patrons of this little coffee shop of Shiru. Okay, now, this is very interesting because this coffee shop was not actually selling coffee; it was actually selling information to companies that wanted to hire people. It was kind of like an HR company. Now, the nice thing is that you can have answers about people, and you can decide if you want to hire them or not according to the data that they gave. And again, that kind of raises the question: what is the value of the data that those students gave? Okay, is it worth more than a coffee, more than a croissant, less than that? Okay, and again, that kind of raises the question of what is the worth of the data that we're giving voluntarily to Google and LinkedIn and Amazon and Facebook and all the rest of the big tech companies that we're using, or WeChat for that matter. Okay, so part of the ideology. Now, this is very interesting because part of the ideology of blockchain and the people that were the first entrants of this were exactly talking about this. They were saying we don't want centralization, we want decentralization, and we want the ownership of the data to move to the hands of the people. Okay, that means that theoretically, in a utopian world, we would all be connected to this network, and all the data that we were creating would be stored by us, for us. Okay, that means that this lecture, if there was any value for it, or people were making money off it, then I would know about it, and Nicholas would know about it, and all of you participants that were here could know about it, and there would be some sort of agreement between us, and everybody was creating, you know, getting some sort of value from it. And all the data that is stored, now this lecture is going to be going on YouTube. Who's going to be making money off this lecture? YouTube, right? But it shouldn't belong to YouTube. It should belong to Word Learning. It should belong to us. It should belong to somebody else, not YouTube, right? So this is one of the ideological questions of who should own the data, because a lot of the ideology behind blockchain and decentralization was the idea that the data should belong to the people that are generating it. Okay, so I hope that kind of answered the question.
Well, it's a kind of Occupy blockchain technology.
Occupy blockchain technology. No, it should be Occupy data.
Let me take a question from Facebook. We have it from Anessa Kolakovic. Anessa asks, she would like to give some examples of blockchain in the education sector.
I don't remember seeing anything in the education sector, but you know, we could use it because here, this is an easy use case. What if all the tests and everything was on a blockchain system, and then instead of starting to send things to different universities, then everything was, you know, recorded? I don't like this idea though, because it's kind of like, what are the poor little dyslexic kids? My kids are dyslexic, going to do when their grades are not so high, right? Then it could ruin their ability to enter, and all the data about them. Oh, this one is dyslexic. This one has ADHD. This one has learning disabilities, and all the data could be stored on a blockchain theoretically, and then academic institutions could be getting all this data from one to the other, and all the data was transferred because everything was on a blockchain that was connecting between all the different educational systems. I'm not sure I like that idea, but it's possible. It's a use case.
Yes. So the other question comes from Ifaza. She's asking, through blockchain, the unique distribution of wealth and poverty can be controlled by allocating a certain amount of fixed digital currency to the population of citizens. Yes. This way, there will be a reduction in corruption, and the world would be a peaceful place. Would also achieve most of the CDJs from the sustainable goals. Do you think that this might be a solution to achieve them?
You know, technology is technology, and humans are humans, and any technology can be used for good, and any technology can be used for bad. I actually see the creation of data as a way to create, you know, better distribution, because even countries that are very poor, they still use Facebook, they still use, they still have cell phones, and they're still generating data. Okay, so theoretically, if we want to tackle this aspect and say, you know, we want better distribution of funds, then this could be a good place for a solution, because instead of having all the money in the hands of the tech giants, now the tech giants are going to hate me. Theoretically, if it belonged to the people that were generating the data, they could have more money. You know, it was a different kind of distribution of the funds. Now, coming and saying, let's create more money and print more money and give it to people, that doesn't work, because, you know, there's inflation and there's the value of what that money is worth. But there is, there is a very interesting case. How many minutes do we have left, Nicholas?
We have like 10, 15 minutes we have.
All right. So this is something that happened actually in World Learning in one of the conferences that I came to. I think it was in Saloniki. I gave a lecture about blockchain, and at the end of the lecture came a very nice person that was sitting in the audience, and he told me a story that he worked in a blockchain company, and what they did was their company, it's called Airdropped. They gave digital currencies to what was it? It was I don't remember how it's called. A refugee camp in Africa. Okay, what they did was they went to a refugee camp. I didn't even need to go there, and they sent digital currencies. They told them, they gave them a message that anybody that downloads their app receives a certain amount of digital currencies. Now, not everybody had a phone, but everybody could have access to a phone and have their own little wallet. And what happened was that, you know, they airdropped. They gave everybody that joined the network, they gave them, let's say, a value of X amount of currencies. About a year afterwards, they received an email from a girl that was living in that refugee camp, and she told them that they actually have saved the lives and changed the standard of living in this refugee camp. Why? Because apparently before this airdrop, the people in the refugee camp were just sitting in an area that was closed off. They were getting ratios of food, and they couldn't trade, they couldn't go out. There was no money there. There was nothing. And what happened was that the moment that they gave the people ability to have a certain kind of money, of funds, people started trading amongst each other. Instead of, bartering, I'll give you a loaf of bread for 2 carrots, they actually had money, okay, some sort of currency, and they could start creating their own little economy where, let's say, babysitting services would be given, I don't know what, $2, and if somebody was selling something that they baked, or I don't know what, fixing the roof of somebody else's house, they would be getting $3, and they created their own little micro economy. They were still closed in a refugee camp. They still had no access outside. They were still just getting a small portion of food, but the issue was that they created their own little economic area that was unrelated to what's happening outside of the refugee camp. So I'm going to retract and say that there are use cases where creating digital currencies could come and help. I'd say, I wouldn't say that it would help poverty, the distribution of funds, but it would enable smarter transactions between people and kind of elevate their ability to connect with each other, not only by trading goods, but rather to, using money as something that they could trade with. I hope I'm making sense. Am I explaining myself clearly enough?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, for me it makes sense, but let me just move on to the next questions in order to have time in order to respond to everyone. So Ifaza actually have written that exactly my point. Meirav, the standard of living of the poor would improve throughout digital currency. Thank you, Ifaza. We have another question. How do you see tokenized as asset offerings? How does that work from a regulatory perspective? Do you need a license to attract investors for a particular building?
Okay, so this is the whole issue of what I said, that anybody can create a currency, and startup companies have been using this for the last couple of years in order to raise funds, and usually they did this by a coin offering or a token offering. Okay, now at first when people were selling, it was these tokens, the regulator was not necessarily on top of it until they kind of noticed that certain legalities have been breached. Okay, and this is the whole issue, and it's a regulatory issue of when a token that you're selling is called a security, and then you have to go through the security laws, and you have to receive the license, and you have to make sure that you're not doing something that's fraudulent or something that's illegal. And when it's a regular ICO, which is like a regular token, and it's called a utility token. Okay, this is the whole lecture in itself. And there are rules about this. You can't, technologically you can do this, and technologically you can create your own token, and technologically if it's a utility token, then you don't have a problem with a regulator. But how do you know if you're creating something that's legal or illegal? That's where you need to learn and make sure that you're not doing something that later on could be stopped. And one of the examples is Telegram. Telegram created a token, right? And they raised a lot of funds, and then came to SEC and stopped them, and now everybody's kind of stuck with that. And there are many, many more digital currencies that are in the same situation. And the second part of it, I think, were they asking about creating the token and the value of it? There was a second part to that question, right?
Yes.
Or did I answer it?
No. I think that you answered it. The main thing it was, wait, just give me a minute. The second part is what it was about. Do you need license to attract investors for a particular building?
Okay, so the whole idea is if you're calling your offering an investment, yes, of course, it's a security. Okay, and the idea, there's a whole issue. I don't want to go into this because this is something that a legal person, I'm not a lawyer, but I can tell you that the SEC kind of put rules of thumb of when something is a security and when it's not, and it goes by the Howey test. So you look up the word Howey test and check on Google how it has to do with digital currencies. But the moment that you're talking about selling something in order for it to be an investment, you need to check your regulator. Okay, don't do that without checking your regulator. Okay.
Yes.
One question on top of that.
Oh, yes, yes,
just
please.
Because we were talking about digital assets. I was just wondering, like, can a digital asset have a physical presence alongside being a digital presence? Like, for instance, if it's a real estate and we want to tokenize a building, and there is some paper which states that the building belongs to somebody who then can tokenize it to different users. But then, like, somebody still needs to hold on to the physical paper. And how does that work out?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and there were a few of these projects, and each one of them kind of solved it differently. Theoretically, it's, you know, the regular securities that we're using right now, the stocks. There's a piece of paper in the background of it, you know, and some of the solutions used papers. Some of them, you know, the whole idea at the end of it. How is it called? Like the place where the ownership of buildings. I know how it's called in Israel. I don't know. I guess there's names around the world for, you know, the government. I'd say the government part that is in charge of writing who owns what buildings. Okay. Theoretically, if they were working on blockchain, nothing would have needed to be with paper. There wouldn't be any papers involved, because the house would be written there on blockchain or in a digital you know, existence, and then you wouldn't need papers.
Right.
Everything else was also digital.
I think to this
But,
question,
you know,
so I believe Abhirup asked this. There's already a state in India who have started implementing this in Andhra Pradesh. I'm not sure whether they have completed it, but I think they're using Hyperledger for this. They are trying to bring on their entire land acquisition and ownership under blockchain.
I think Dubai also is in the middle of that, if I remember correctly, with Consensus. Do you know Consensus, the company? Joe Lubin's company? I think they have projects in the Middle East. I think it was Dubai, if I remember correctly, that they're moving this side of the regulation to all become on blockchain. It's something that would create very big value, but go and convince governments to do it. It's not that easy. But I'm happy to hear that in India it's already happening too. What else?
So I have a question. What do you, can I go ahead?
Yes.
So from your experience, what do you think are the major risks when you see in terms of transforming an industry to blockchain, or probably implementing a certain blockchain in certain sector of the industry? Because we have seen with this, probably with it was Bitcoin, which took our attention towards blockchain, and it was Bitcoin which eventually did a negative marketing kind of a thing, when people were a little skeptical about going towards that, because people were only thinking from Bitcoin perspective when they were discussing about blockchain. And we have seen the impact wherein the banking sectors have started implementing private blockchains and also. What do you think are the major risks involved when you are taking a transformation project for digitally, basically transforming it to a blockchain based industry, and how do we typically handle them?
Wait, I'm having problems with my Wi-Fi. Just a second. Let me fix this. Just a minute. I apologize. Just a minute, because people are trying to call me, and then it's kind of ruining my.
So just to remind you that we will take these questions that we have received are going to be the last ones, because we will have actually to end up in 10 minutes. Meira, could you please?
Okay. All right. Yes. Okay. The risks. There are a few risks in different directions. A, digital currencies are risky as an investment tool because you can always lose. Second of all, 90-something% of the tokens that were created during the last couple of years have actually lost their value and don't have any value later. So there's a risk involving in that. With blockchain itself, the risks are that what if everything's on record and you can't delete it? And what does that mean for private people? And think in the lens of 1984 and an Orwellian kind of existence. Okay, that's kind of scary. What happens if the blockchain is used actually against the private people? Okay, that's scary. It's technology. It could be used in order to help people, or it could be used against people. It's a technology, right? So as with anything, there are risks involved, and there could be maluses of this in different areas. You know, you could censor people, you could get people off the grid, you could, you know, there's so many things that could happen, because it's a very big database that can't be deleted. And let's say, what if somebody has, I don't know what, records of something that they did, tickets, I don't know what, something that they did wrong. And then forever and ever, everybody goes and sees that they did something wrong in their past, or something that was perceived as wrong, okay, by the government that they're living in, okay? And it continues chasing them around, and nobody can change this file, and it's always there. And what about privacy and data breach and all the rest of it? And imagine that you have 54 copies of our database, okay? Who's protecting all these 54 copies? What if one of us is not investing enough in keeping it protected? So all the data of all of us is actually, it could fall in different hands. So yes, we can go on and on about different kinds of risks of blockchain, but there are also the benefits, just like any technology.
Great.
Right, yeah.
Can we just go on with a number of questions that we have received? So Manar Kaso is asking, in the case of private blockchain, the use of a consensus algorithm, is it important? For example, the case of bank entity or university.
Okay, that's kind of a technical question, and that's something that I could answer and say if they're using it, then yeah, it's smart. But I don't want to go into something that I'm not a professional in.
Okay, so from Arnab, we have a question from what you have experienced so far, and what.
Yeah, that was the same question which I asked actually. Sorry.
Okay, sorry, apologies. So then we will go on Golan's Trevisa question. Transaction database and database owners are exponential numbers. Doesn't that raise a problem in terms of data storage and calculation capacities? Energy needed.
Oh, yes.
Yes, etc.
Oh, yes, completely. Yes. Okay. This was an issue, I think, that came up 3-4 years ago, or 3 years ago, 2 years ago, something like that. The amount, remember that I told you that we're talking about crypto miners, the ones that are doing the calculation at the end of the page, right? We said that everybody, let's remember our database. At the end, when we finish a page, all of us need to do a calculation. That calculation uses resources, okay? Now, what we said was that in Bitcoin and in other digital currencies, in order to do it faster and faster, people were creating farms of computers that have a lot of computing power in order to be the first ones to finish the calculation, in order for them to get the bonus of creating the next the next line actually in the blockchain, right? We're creating the next calculation in the blockchain. And it got to the point where economically it wasn't worth it, because the amount of electricity that they were using was bigger than, I think, Iceland was what they were saying, more than countries. And that's an issue. Okay, that's an issue that needs to be taken into account, because if the calculation itself is so inefficient, maybe the usage of it is not worth it until we find a better way to use the energy, and not to create something that's using energy in an unsmart way. But I think they found solutions to that already. That was like 2 or 3 years ago. There was a whole issue around this.
And these are the last final questions. The one is from Albert, and the other one is from Gobi. What are the main technological challenges, as you see, from blockchain for the coming era? And Gobi is asking.
Wait. Let's answer this one. Okay.
Go.
I think that one of the problems with implementing blockchain is that because it's connecting between many entities, you need them to cooperate. Okay, so theoretically, if we're changing the stock exchanges of the world into blockchain, which would make sense, everything would, we wouldn't have to have the T+2 days and everything in order for the assets to be moved from one hand to the other. Okay, it would be very efficient. But the problem is now try to put NASDAQ and the S&P and all the rest of the exchanges in the world on the same kind of blockchain, and they all have to agree about the same kind of blockchain. And who does the data belong to, and who's getting the commission? And we're changing the whole business model of how they're getting funds. And it's so hard to create these kinds of cooperations, because blockchain is creating cooperations between many entities. You have to have them want to do these cooperations. That means that even if technically it's able to be done, it doesn't mean that necessarily the different bodies that need to be connected on this blockchain want to do it. And I'm just bringing this, the stock world as an example. You can do the same thing for medical. Who says that all the hospitals want to connect to this blockchain? They want to invest in building it. So I think that's one of the major hurdles that we can see right now. That the big players don't necessarily want to play together, or they don't see the value of doing it, and actually they're losing their ownership of data. Right? Imagine all the banks working on a blockchain together. Imagine Facebook and Google doing it. Why would they want to lose their power?
Yes,
okay?
This is actually the last question from Gobi, that asked whether she can say that this technology is only useful for the companies which are dealing with data, like Facebook and so on.
No, it could be good for for many different use cases. Okay, and this is where I'm going to be talking about, you know, the sports sector. This is helping the sports sector, and it's not the tech giants. It's actually taking the power out of the tech giants. Okay, or there were projects on blockchain that were kind of recreating Facebook, but this time having people paid for their contribution with the data, and that's kind of I'd say something that's against the big tech giants, right? But the question is, how do you do user acquisition when you have 2.7 billion people on Facebook? How do you move them to somewhere where they're going to be making money for creating the same content? You have to reach those people, right? That's not that easy.
Yes.
Okay.
The very last one: can quantum computing be a threat to blockchain?
Well, quantum computing is very interesting, and that's a lecture in itself, which is very, you know, what about quantum computing in banking or you know, security of banking or information? That's crazy. It's like everything on steroids. Exactly. So that's a lecture in itself. But I have a question. Are there no women asking any questions? Hello, women, where are you?
There are women. Now, it just didn't make any difference between the sexes. So
I know, but you know, I want to see the women here. Good. I see faces of women. I'm happy because usually when I'm standing in on stages, I see for some reason in this field more men than women. But I want to see the women.
Our audience is actually more than gender balance. I think that we are overcrowded from women. So,
yay! All right, way to go! I'm happy to see that. Okay. So, are we reaching our end of the session, or do we have? Yes.
Let me just say a few words. I would like to thank you very much. You have been, I mean, an amazing speaker. This is something that I really enjoyed it, and I think our audience enjoyed it really much because they stayed for almost 90 minutes. It was Meirav Harel. I'm sure that she will join us again because she's close by to Greece at the very end. She's living in Italy. So
yeah, maybe we can fly at some point in life. It's going to be so exciting.
Exactly. And she's a friend actually and of Digital Communication Network. As I told you in the beginning, this event is co-organized from Digital Communication Network C-Hub that is based in Thessaloniki, together with World Learning and with the wider Digital Communication Network, which is supported from State Department Citizens Exchanges Office, to whom we actually thank for giving us the opportunity to host all these events. Special thanks to Meirav, special thanks to Aaron, to Anna, Vlad, and special thanks to all of you that you kept up this discussion going. I think that we have opened up a digital space for a very interesting topic, which is blockchain, and is part of the webinars that we have launched. Keep following us on our social media in order to be informed of the webinars that we will conduct in next week and the weeks after. Once again, thank you very much for all of you.
Thank you.